I mean, there's resistance from the north to the south. In the north, Hezbollah has escalated their attacks from the north. The West Bank is, particularly the northern West Bank, is basically locked in daily armed struggle in Tubas, Tulkarem, Nablus, Balata, Jenin camp. I think any other time, like we've said before, we would be calling what's happening in the West Bank an Intifada. And what we're seeing in Gaza is the defense of Gaza from this massive Israeli mechanized invasion that's now 3 weeks old. And we're seeing videos. We saw a bunch of videos released this weekend that showed that the fight is still happening in the outer edges. Israel hasn't been able to maintain control even over the outer edges in the northwest and the northeast of the Gaza Strip. We saw videos this weekend that showed multiple Israeli soldiers being killed. And Abu Obeida gave his audio message, and he told Israelis that word of their deaths would come to them eventually, suggesting that it's underreported, that Israel's underreporting their deaths, which is something that Hezbollah used to do, release videos and reports saying this is where your soldiers died, and then waiting for 2 days till Israel says, basically confirms what we saw. And so Qassam showed that in their videos this weekend. And then, sure enough, 2 days later, Israel admitted the deaths of 10 of their soldiers, 8 seriously wounded, fighting in northern Gaza. Israel doesn't tell us where or how they died in fighting. They've really been underreporting they haven't reported a wounded count, as we've talked about. And they often leak the deaths out like many days later, which sort of confuses which attacks you're looking at from the Qassam log and which ones the Israelis, because we've seen videos that surely look like killed in action. We saw the thermobaric grenade, the fuel grenade, be fired on a troop position in Beit Hanun with the soldiers sitting in the window. This weekend, we saw a video of an Al Ghul sniper rifle hitting an Israeli soldier on foot in Beit Hanun, and then for the next half a minute, other soldiers come in to try to retrieve the body of the shot soldier, and they're getting shot. So we're seeing in these videos actual Israeli soldiers being killed and injured at a rate that the Israelis weren't acknowledging, although they did acknowledge the next day. So yeah, we've seen resistance from the north to the south. We're seeing, Abu Obeida said, 62 damaged or destroyed vehicles. I think damaged are a lot of them. Just in a 4-day window. Then yesterday they reported 25 vehicles hit. And that's because the Israelis have hundreds of armored vehicles inside the Gaza Strip that are being hit. And we can see by these videos that there's still street by street fighting. We're still seeing we're seeing Qassam fighters hitting Israeli armor point blank from behind, which again just suggests that the Israelis aren't dismounting from their armor. They're not holding any of these neighborhoods. The military term is clearing, which has a military term, that means that you've removed all resistance fighters from that area. And that's clearly not what's happening. We got reports in the Israeli media this weekend of a complex ambush on Israeli troops, where 360-degree ambush where dozens of Qassam fighters and 𝐤 fighters, it was one joint operation, are coming out and hitting the Israeli armor in a 360-degree ambush, and then able to, under mortar fire, like complex combined arms actions, where the infantry and anti-tank units are hitting the tanks, and then the mortar units, the artillery units, are coming in and providing cover for them to then withdraw. So these aren't suicide missions. They're not martyrdom missions. They're these fighters hitting complex ambushes and then retreating back to their bases safely to carry out another attack. We're hearing reports because the Israelis are allowing some foreign press to embed and go in on these tours with them. And The Economist the other day talked about how he was in with an infantry battalion, which includes tanks and engineering units, but that these units aren't allowed to go down, that there's a standing order in the IDF that nobody is allowed to go down into the tunnels. And so essentially when they're finding these tunnels, they're basically just shelling and bombing from the air to close the entrances. They're not actually going into the tunnels to do what the thing that they promised that they were going to do, which was root out every Qassam fighter in the Gaza Strip. And we can see that map that Tamara just pulled up there. It doesn't look all that different from last week. Those pinch marks are the bites where they moved in to get the hospitals. And a lot of that blue shaded area are fiercely contested territories. The blue in the center there, in the center of Gaza to the east, is 𝐄𝐥𝐿 and Zaytun. There's reports of dozens of ambush attacks just on that axis each day. So that area is definitely contested area. In the northeast, that's where we see Beit Hanun, and that's where those videos from this weekend were, where they're literally fighting from adjacent buildings. So they don't even control the building beside the building that they're in. And they took multiple casualties in Beit Hanun. And then if you look to the east in the top left corner, the northwest corner, Beit Lahia, that blue that pushes down to those two encircled hospitals, that's the beach. That's not a built up area. So they're going around the built up areas. They're not able to control the built up areas. That bite in the center on the left hand side, that's the bite that they moved in to take Shifa through the unpopulated area of downtown where they blew up the Palestinian Legislative Council that hasn't met since 2006. And they planted a flag on top of it, even though nobody fought for that territory. Up there a little bit is where you see Shifa, where the Israeli soldiers from Flotilla 13, their best Navy SEALs, stormed the hospital and took photographs planting the flag on the roof of the largest hospital in Gaza. Those are the military successes that Israel has explained to us. They haven't explained any other significant military successes as their concerted structural attack on hospitals has been taking place. They're not hitting military victories where these hospitals are on the way to that military objective. Their objective is the hospitals. And there's fierce fighting. In many cases, there's more fighting today than there was the first days of the invasion. And I think in basic guerrilla warfare understanding, that makes sense. Once the Israelis get fixed positions, the attacks will come even more so than when you're attacking the sharp end of the invasion spear, which doesn't make all that much sense for a guerrilla army that's vastly outnumbered and don't themselves have tanks and airplanes. Although we did see airplanes. We saw Qassam launch this weekend one of their suicide drones, their attack drones, which is basically a drone that acts like a missile, a kamikaze drone. We saw that be launched today or this weekend. We also saw a complex suicide bombing attack in the north where 3 bombers went in carrying Yasin shells and thermobaric shells, as well as suicide vests, and hit an Israeli position in the north that we haven't got casualty reports, but we saw from the scene clearly casualties from that attack. We also saw videos with Palestinian fighters doing what we talked about before, where they literally take the Yasin warhead that acts like a grenade that has a pin, and we watch them literally walk up to the Israeli tank, put the device in between the reactive armor and the trophy system that knocks out incoming rounds, and slip it by hand right into that space below the turret, which is just like incredible courage for one thing. But it's just like a precision guided missile that's put in right in that spot in the tank turret. And again, that's partially showing you that the Israelis aren't outside of their tanks, because Palestinians are able to, we're just from these videos able to see that Palestinians are hitting them with complex ambushes. They're hitting them from behind. They're hitting them from close distances that are close enough for the trophy system to be ineffective. And we're seeing, what the Israelis said, that they lost 10% of their armors out of service 10 days into the ground operation. They haven't given numbers since then. But that kind of rate of attrition doesn't sound like much until you say, there's 700 or 800 vehicles. And then you're starting to talk about significant numbers just in the beginning of this war. The Israelis haven't even taken up their fixed positions yet, which will surely be hit harder. And even if you use Israeli numbers, which are clearly exaggerated and include massacring civilians, but they're only talking about a few thousand maximum number of fighters killed. And Israeli estimates themselves, suggest that there's as many as 40,000 Qassam fighters, particularly when you consider all of the national security forces that exist in Gaza themselves. Plus, you have the other factions that number in the tens of thousands. There's still a long way to go in this war for Israel to make any kind of claims of military success. There haven't been any. We've just seen concerted attacks on hospitals. And I mean, Abu Obeida said that. Well, he said, while we're fighting your tanks and causing losses, you're preoccupied attacking civilian infrastructure, talking about the Palestinian Legislative Council, and hospitals and civilians, just massacring civilians. There's no military objectives being reached that can be bragged about in any serious way. We see them in Shifa Hospital, raiding Shifa Hospital and being there for more than a week. And their evidence is, again, these phone calls, just really thin evidence.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on Donate Now. Thank you.